1. Since I was very young, probably somewhere around 10 years old, there was this thing that I would just kind of sense. Every once in a while I would catch glimpses of it, but never directly saw anything. Usually just a passing figure or a hand clutching a corner. Sometimes it would just point at me, but more often than not I would just feel it. It seemed to like ceiling corners hiding behind me, and hovering slightly behind or over me. It never felt threatening or dangerous, at first, but I could tell it was something dark. It also had a pretty stereotypical appearance. It basically looked like a ring wraith from the Lord of the Rings movies without the armor, just the cloak. I know, kinda dumb. I always figured if it really were a demon or spirit, it probably just took a form that scared me. I was terrified of the ring wraiths. Honestly, I assumed it was imagination as a kid. I was a Christian, and I believed that things like that couldn't hurt me, even if they were real. Anyways, the older I got, the more I felt it, and the more I started to wonder if it were real. I was a pretty depressed teenager, so I thought maybe my mental state had something to do with it. But it just felt so visceral and strong. I started to accept it as real when I moved away for college. It had followed me to a couple different houses. Moved a couple times as a kid, but for some reason, feeling it at a Christian university in a different state really freaked me out. But it was just the same old feeling some weird thing or catching glimpses of a hooded figure type stuff. I only finished 1 year of college, and then I moved back home. As expected, it kept happening. Fast forward several years later, new state, living on my own, dating a girl who is now my wife. By this time, it was nearly a daily presence, or feeling, or occurrence. I had learned to kind of ignore it, and if I really got scared, I would pray. Didn't really make it go away, but it calmed me down. Also, I had stopped catching glimpses of it. It was always just a strong, invisible presence now, all feeling and sensing. Around this time, I had my one and only dream that had this thing in it. In the dream, I saw it full on for the first time. Typical black-cloaked, creepy figure. It appeared to me and didn't ever speak, but somehow I knew what it was trying to say to me. Anyways, in the dream, it showed me from its point of view, the figure's point of view, like visually, how it was appearing to different members of my family and showing them, my family members, how it was going to kill me. My family sat me down and we started discussing it. Then my dog started growling. My mom said, "It's here." I looked where my dog was staring, and the figure was there. It pointed at me and rushed at me. Then I woke up. Needless to say, that dream really freaked me out. I had already told my girlfriend about how I had this thing that had been following me around since I was a kid. She didn't put too much stock into it until I told her about the dream. Then something happened that solidified in my mind at least the fact that this thing was real. This happened a week or so after the dream. My girlfriend was sleeping over for the night. I wasn't the best Christian. She was asleep next to me in bed. It was super late, and I was watching a movie on my computer. The thing was hanging out in the corner of the ceiling closest to the door, but I was so used to it that I didn't pay it any attention. All of a sudden, my girlfriend woke up and stared at me with this terrified look in her eyes. I asked her what was wrong, and she immediately pointed to the ceiling corner where it was, and said, "That thing is right there, isn't it?" I was beyond terrified at that point. I had told several people, including my parents, about this presence. But this was the first time anyone had felt it too, let alone pointed to exactly where it was hanging out. She also told me that when she woke up and saw my face, I was covered in weird black tick marks. She said that they were only there for like a second or two, but it really freaked her out. Especially because she felt the presence too. That night was the peak of my experiences with my little shadow, pun intended. It's been about 6 years since that night. I am now happily married, no longer a Christian, and I only feel that thing maybe 1 to 3 times a year. It's so infrequent now that I can't be sure I'm actually feeling it or just imagining it. 2. In December 2018, I was visiting some friends in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and staying with them. I was traveling with my Portuguese girlfriend. One of the roommates, Hannah, came into the front room where we would sleep and started a conversation with us. She started talking about fortune tellers and psychics, mediums, etc. People who would see people's futures and past. At the end of the conversation, I told Hannah that it's interesting how she told us all this. One day before I was going to one for the first time. Another friend had planned for me to visit one the next day in another part of Nova Scotia. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even my girlfriend. Hannah told me a few things in that conversation, namely how she wouldn't want to know anything about her current relationship, because it would be really shitty if you were with someone and then were told it wouldn't last. That would be depressing. She also mentioned dragonflies being a sign of hers, or maybe the sign of her friend who told her some stories. The day comes, and my good friend Laura took me to see a spirit guide. Nobody paid for anything, this was just some kind of destiny. Her name was Julie, never met her before, and she wouldn't know anything about me or my girlfriend, but she did. We were invited into her home. It was cozy, and I came in with an open mind. I don't believe in anything really, but there's no way all of this is a string of endless coincidences. She started reading me. She gazed into my soul, and I looked away while I was sat on a bar stool in her own kitchen. I felt that looking into her eyes for however long would be pretty awkward, especially for posture. She started talking so fast. She wouldn't even pause for a moment. I didn't say a single word for the entire duration, I just listened. You were followed and protected by 4 spirits, 2 of which you don't know are dead. When I was 4 years old, my grandfather died. I also lost a friend who was the son of Laura, who took me to see this spirit guide. Aside from that, I haven't lost any other friends or family, but my lifestyle has been one where people come and go, and I meet many people and made lots of friends for life. But I had to part ways. It made sense, not to get over-analytical, but 4 has always been my favorite number and my magic number. You're going to have a change of transportation. This one was random and confused me the most at the time, because out of all my traveling life, I never had one change of plans. Fuck me, the next day it happened. We were supposed to hire a car and drive to Montreal, but the car hire wasn't accepting her license because her country has a very specific restriction of driving in Canada. Never heard of such a thing. We had to abandon that and had to catch buses the next day instead. That's not all. We need about 5 or 6 buses, 25 hours to Montreal. First bus broke down on the highway within an hour, in the snow. 2 changes of transportation, right after the day we were told. Syria. Something happened in Syria. Every time I have thought about it since, it gets creepier and creepier. My girlfriend's brother was in the Portuguese Air Force and went to Syria to fight ISIS. ISIS captured him and cut his head off. There was a documentary about this, but I never found it. My girlfriend didn't tell me this until we left. Julie didn't know my girlfriend, not even her name or anything about her in advance. Even so, this isn't something you could search for. You lost an important necklace. When Julie was reading my girlfriend, she said this. No more than 7 days earlier, she lost the necklace her aunt gave her. Her aunt died. She told me this 2 to 4 days before we met Julie. So we were both shocked to hear this because my girlfriend just told me about it that week. There were also so many obscure things from my past that I hadn't even thought about for 10 to 15 years. You couldn't just make it up, and I couldn't even tell you. But it was real. He wants to tell you, comrade. My friend that died in 2015 knew me for a few years. We would address each other as comrade because we were game developers that ran a very famous military genre gaming company. But I completely forgot about this one little thing. It was a reminder. Don't worry about money, it will come. I wasn't sure what she meant at the time because my finances were always the same and stable. But a few months later, things became complicated, but I handled it. Then I had a golden opportunity to earn 6 figures on a project for May 2020. The person offering this deal was very nice, but something inside me told me to wait. 2 weeks later, borders, airports, and stores all over the world shut down because of coronavirus. Right now this is still happening, but if this is also true, then perhaps whatever mess this virus could put me in, I will be okay in the end. Even with 2 new, more mouths to feed. You have a question about your relationship. She said this to both of us. There was literally not a word more on the subject of relationships. Hannah said to us the day before that would suck to know our future. I immediately knew what Julie meant. She was my girlfriend, and I was her boyfriend, but we never defined it. We met casually and just kept seeing each other. We never said I love you, we just existed side by side. We got along well, but we never actually talked about our relationship. A few months later, we broke up and haven't seen each other since. We didn't even have a relationship status on Facebook. Ever since that day, for many months, I kept seeing dragonflies. All because Hannah told me that she or her friend kept seeing dragonflies. I saw a real, alive dragonfly for the first time in years shortly after this experience. I saw decorations of it in stories everywhere. There were so many more things, I wish I could remember it. I have also seen things before they happened. In January 2020, I had a dream of being in a plane crash. I was living in Lima, Peru at the time. A few hours later, a plane crashed in Iran and had lots of news coverage. I also sensed that I was having a baby girl when my wife, the new girlfriend after the one I visited Julie with, was pregnant. I had such confidence, yet my family of the Whites is cursed with boys. I have a brother, we have a father. He has a brother and sister, but the sister has a son and 2 twin sons. That older son of my aunt now has 2 twin sons. He not only has twin brothers, but also twin sons. My brother also has a son. Despite all this, I just knew I was going to have a girl. I made a goodie bag, put in lots of pink stuff, and sent it from Peru to my parents to simultaneously give them gifts and to announce the pregnancy. Not only this, but before I had told anyone what my daughter's name would be, my parents gave a gift, a blanket with the moon on it. Her name is Luna. Anyway, I would be fascinated to know of similar experiences. I will say it once again, everything has been true so far. 3. Monica was born in a small 1,000-year-old village in northern Poland. She once showed me pictures of her hometown. It's not your well-ordered, touristy medieval burg. In fact, the buildings are practically built on top of one another. And any architectural design has been erased, so that the houses can be crammed as close to each other as possible. Which is odd, since the town is built in the middle of a vast plain surrounded by forests. There are no other settlements for miles. On a winter's day in the 1960s, the village priest went to visit a dying parishioner in one of those cramped, higgledy-piggledy homes. The parishioner lived alone. So, after administering last rites to him, the priest sat down in the man's living room to await his passing away. As he was reading his Bible, he looked out of the living room window across the vast, snow-covered fields and forest beyond them. From the forest edge, he saw a man emerge and begin to trek across the fields towards town. It was a strange place to see a person, especially in the middle of winter, since it was far from the main road and there was nothing the priest knew of in that direction to interest anyone. What was equally strange was that the traveler not only ran across the fields towards town, but seemed to be making a direct path to the parishioner's home. As he got closer, things got stranger. At first, only mildly interested in the runner, the priest came to realize that this man was dressed in an odd manner. Though he wore a grey overcoat and fur hat that you'd expect someone in Eastern Europe to wear during the winter, the style of his clothes was completely out of place for the 1960s. The hat was too big, and the coat contained many buttons that was heavily adorned with gold brocade. In fact, the closer he got to the house, the priest suddenly realized that the man was dressed exactly in the distinctive uniform of a Polish soldier from the November Rebellion of 1830, one of the numerous 19th century conflicts for Polish independence from Tsarist Russia. Now remember, this was taking place during the Soviet domination of Poland. There weren't any reenactors back then. And dressing like a reminder against Russian control would surely earn a person an all-expense-paid trip to a gulag in Siberia. The soldier's path didn't waver. He ran straight to the rear of the parishioner's house, to the very window that the priest, now in shock, was observing him. The soldier pressed his face against the window pane and looked into the room. He locked eyes with the priest, and an expression of horror came over his face. He then turned and ran back toward the forest, at a faster pace than approaching the house. The priest stated that the soldier clearly saw him, and that the soldier appeared as real as any living human being. This is what makes me wonder if this incident was in fact a glitch in time instead of a spirit visitation. He probably not only saw a difference in the priest's frock, which would have been different from a 19th century one, but also the differences between a 19th century home and a 20th century one, such as electrical lights, radio, or a television set, which would have completely confused him. The priest continued to watch the soldier run away, until he went back into the forest from where he first emerged. He never saw the soldier again. The November Rebellion was crushed in 1831, and Poland became a principality of Russia until the First World War. I don't know if it was a significant event involving Monica's hometown and the rebellion. So whatever reasons the soldier had for running to the town and the house where the priest was in particular will have to remain unanswered. 4. To preface this, I'm a 16-year-old guy. I live with my grandparents and, as I've been told, my grandfather built the house on top of an old gas station's plot. To answer some questions that, as far as I know, are common, I don't know anything about the station, and I know there is nothing to cause any kind of unwanted presences, or whatever you call them. My grandfather and I are both skeptics, and my grandmother is a hardcore believer. If I missed any, ask it in the comments, and I'll try to answer as best I can. Now, there's been a history of weird shit happening that can be easily explained, like the TV remote being in the kitchen when it was last left in the living room, cats staring at nothing, dog whining at the air with only me home and in my room, etc. But there are two main things that prove to my believer grandmother that something is in our house. This is the first time. My older sister was younger and still lived with us. When my sister E was a lot younger, she would wake up screaming. She would scream absolute bloody murder at like 4 in the morning when she was like 13 for no apparent reason. My grandparents would burst in and try to comfort her to no avail. But the thing is, I slept right underneath her bed and I never heard a goddamn thing. We had a bunk bed with E on the top bunk and myself on the bottom one, and my grandparents in a completely different room next to us would be woken up from a deep sleep when I'd just sleep it off. I was about 9 at the time, and only heard about this several years after it was over with. I wrote it off as sleep paralysis, or her seeing nothing in the darkness while my grandmother insisted it was a ghost, or demon or something. Anyway, everyone else, even E, agreed with my ruling and moved on from it. Though, however much I tried to write it off as anything other than paranormal, I always felt so weird in only that room. It felt like I was being watched all the time. The second is centered around my great-grandfather. There was a period of time where we had to house my great-grandfather. I'll be referring to as L, up until he passed in the hospital. 5 months before he passed, he'd regularly say stuff like, "You kids need to stop getting up in the middle of the night to get snacks. You're all waking me up and shit." Thing is, L would say he heard us at 3 or 4 in the morning when neither of us were. I was about 13 and E was 15 or 16, and we would have gotten beat if we were caught being up that late. Again, I wrote it off as due to his old age or something. After his passing, I inherited his room. That's how I realized that it was only my old room that I felt uncomfortable in. But I wrote that up as finally having my own room and not having to share a room with my difficult older sister. Now those two events above were enough to convince my grandmother that our house is haunted. But the next one is what the story is about, and has me freaked out enough to seek help from anywhere at this point. For months, I've been hearing footsteps, not usual footsteps either. They sound like a man wearing steel-toe boots, walking around for minutes at a time. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me because I only heard it when no one else was awake in the dead of night. Maybe that should have been evidence against it. I don't know. No matter the answer to that, what happened this afternoon completely destroyed that theory. I was by myself, grandfather out in the garage, which is completely separate from the house, and my grandmother went out for some painting supplies. My dog was at the window, per usual, when my grandmother leaves the house, and my cats were napping on the dining room chairs. I had to use the bathroom, so I went. I finished my business, and as I was washing my hands, I heard them. Clear, heavy footsteps, walking from my old bedroom down the hall towards the dining room. They were so clear that I actually thought my grandfather came inside to grab something from his room. I dried my hands and called out, "Grandpa, you forget something." I walked down the hall to see... nothing. I shrugged it off as he rushed out to work on a car or something, and went back to my room to work on my late schoolwork. Later that day, when we were eating dinner, I remembered the occurrence and asked my grandfather about it, to which he responded with, "What do you mean? I've been in the garage all day." My stomach sank as I excused myself from dinner. He was the only person who could have come in during that time. Again, I have no clue what could have caused the footsteps. Such a small thing now has me questioning everything that's happened in the house that I excused. 5. I'm a 23-year-old Brazilian girl, and I had a paranormal encounter in my childhood, really intense. When I was 7, I was very afraid of total darkness, and I would wake up under my bed, or even under my brother's bed. It was on the other side of the room. I had no idea how it was going to get there. Until one day at school, during the break, I sat down for a while and just watched the children play. About 4 children appeared that I had never seen before, looking completely normal. I didn't find anything strange about them until days later I realized that they are like the children of a children's novel I saw. They asked me if I knew about the legend of the 5th floor. I said no, but like any curious child, I wanted to know more. They just said that a monster would show up when there was no one. At that school, the children had to go down and stay on the ground at the same time, of course. And they couldn't just go upstairs and go to the floor of the room that was completely empty in between. I took advantage of a moment that there was no teacher watching, and I entered with those children to the building since the first floors were empty. When we got to the 4th floor, I went up the last flight of stairs alone, looked down the hall, and saw nothing and no one. I looked back at the children and said there was nothing. The moment I said there was nothing, they stared behind me without saying anything, screamed and ran. I turned and looked, and in front of me was a creature completely solid, a few centimeters from my face. It was the height of an adult man, I would say 1.7 meters, but at that moment it was my exact height. He had black eyes like those of a puppet, a nose like that of a squid, and red straw hair, and a round body almost like that of a giant plush doll. It is worth mentioning that I had no idea who or what Baba Yaga was, since we don't have legends like that in Brazil, and I didn't even have the slightest idea of what I saw for many years. The breath was heavy, and there was red smoke coming from behind it. I froze for 5 seconds, and it stood there looking me straight in the eye for those moments. Then I started running, only that I fell on the 2nd flight of stairs and started to lose consciousness. All I could think of in those moments was, I don't want to die, not here, not now. Meanwhile, that monster descended slowly, each flight of stairs without making a sound. When I was close, I managed to regain my consciousness, and I didn't feel any pain. I just went down extremely fast and went to the playground. Of course, no one believed me, but I want to make it clear that I wasn't sleeping at any time, and that memory, even after several years, is very vivid. There isn't a moment when I sleep that I don't have vivid dreams. Obviously, they are not related to this anymore, but they are not of terror. Mostly it's just me. But I'm always a different person in a different world. Always a different person. Sometimes, I can even feel other people's emotions as fragments. My fear of the dark continues. I had problems with involuntary incorporation about 3 times in my life. Of all the experiences I've had, this has been the strongest and most vivid. And I would like that if anyone knew anything, any information or stories similar to mine, that they could tell me about it. P.S. I never saw those kids again, and they weren't real. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 185. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. If you have a story yourself you'd like to send in, providing it is of course your story, then please do send it along to kingofthecities@gmail.com. I should probably put this at the start of the video, but of course there are timestamps in the description of videos, so you can skip along to whichever story you like. Also, thank you to the people who are following along in chat, listening to me trip over my tongue. I seem to be having one of those nights where it's especially difficult. But we're getting there. Not too bad. That was just over an hour's recording, so that's only a few minutes longer than usual. Excellent. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.